Ladies and gentlemen, that was the magnificent Tammy Hall. Tammy Hall, thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh, how good it is to be back at Heart and Soul. I bring you greetings from your cousins you've met and maybe not have met at Elder Pride and CSL Visalia, all those places that I'm playing right now. Everybody is with you here. But today I'm going to ask you to do something a little bit different. I mean, after all, this is a loving and compassionate, world class teaching and empowerment ministry. So I'm going to ask that you be willing to be taught. Are you willing to be taught? Okay, good, because I'm going to take you back in time. Now, when I was a little, many of you could imagine that I was not really a shy child. But when I was a child of like 8 or 9 years of age, I kept hearing the storytellers in my family talk about, well, you remember 10 years ago, or just 10 years ago we would do this or we would do that. And as a little kid, I couldn't wait to be 10. To me, there was just something magical that must happen at 10 years of age. And I could then be a part of the conversation. Well, at every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every gathering of family, every gathering of elders, when they told the stories, as elders do, sometimes they repeat the stories. Now, I know no one in here would do that. Nor would your grandchildren be coming to you and say, but Grandma, you told us that. So when they would tell these stories and they would say, well, you remember when? I'd go, yes. I was remembering when they told it before. But they would say, you couldn't have remembered. You're not even 10. And I had to come up with an answer for that. I had to come up with an answer that resonated for me. And so one day, I proudly said, well, I may not have been born yet, but I was here. I was here. And when I heard myself say that, something that was true. I suddenly realized that I had this empathy, this kind of understanding for what may have happened before my time. So today, we're going to go back to exactly 60 years ago today. And I want you, I know most of you in this room were not here 60 years ago. So you're going to have to be like little Jack and take yourself back into a time when you were here but just weren't born yet. Okay? If you're willing, we're going to go there. And I want you to imagine you have been invited to a party. You've been invited to a party on New Year's Day, 1965. And you're getting ready for that party. Oh, okay, I get that you've not quite. I'm going to ask Danielle to help me out. We need a little something, something to remind you what it might have been like to get ready for that party in 1965. And maybe that little record player is in the back of the room and your older sibling has put this record on. Danielle? So I want you to imagine yourself. You've gotten this invitation. What are you going to wear? Who's going to be there? You've been invited to a party by somebody you never thought you were going to be invited to a party for. And you can't wait. What am I going to wear? It's a costume party. Okay, so what kind of drag am I going to put on for that costume party? Am I going to borrow something from an older sibling? Or what am I going to put on? And then as you also think about it, are they going to be there? Is this going to be that time when I might just be able to spend a little time? Okay, well, you've all been invited to the Mardi Gras Ball on January 1st, 1965 at the California Club on Polk Street in San Francisco. Now, but before we can go to this ball, we got to know a little history. Part of what my talk is today is to talk about the allies, advocates, and co-conspirators of our life. We've done a lot of work about that already this year, and we're going to do even more in the year ahead. But today, I want you to have a demonstration of not only what it is to be an ally, but how to move from being an ally to an advocate to a co-conspirator. Okay? So, if you can imagine, in August of 1964, just a little over 60 years ago, there was wait for it, a group of ministers that came together that had been empowered by the civil rights movement. Okay, they had learned to really be the allies and the advocates of that movement and standing up for people and celebrating that the Civil Rights Act had just been inaugurated into law, and what more can we do? And so the Episcopal minister, the Presbyterian minister, the United Church of Christ minister, the Disciples of Christ minister, and the minister from the Glide Memorial Methodist Church, known as Cecil Williams, all came together to demonstrate that they were going to be allies for this group of people known as homophiles. Now just listen to that word, homophile. But that's how LGBTQ plus people were referred to in the mid-60s. They were homophiles. But the ministers decided that this was a marginalized group of people that had been wrongly humiliated and treated by the San Francisco Police Department. I know no one can imagine that being true. But if you can imagine that they knew that there was injustices happening, because whenever there was a gathering of these homophiles, often it was finished by a police raid and paddy wagons and people incarcerated, jobs lost, lives ruined. And these ministers had been ministers that had aligned themselves with the teaching of the master teacher Yeshua, whom the world came to call Jesus, in Matthew 25, when it said, "You were hungry and I fed you. You were unclothed and I clothed you. You were unhoused and I housed you. You were incarcerated and I visited you." That was their call to action. And so they made the decision that they were going to be allies of these homophiles and work to get to understand them. That was radical thinking. That was really radical thinking. So they created this convention that happened in Marin County in August of 1964, where they brought members of the homophile community together, along with psychologists and other clergies, to have a conversation, to really talk about what was going on. And they heard horrific stories of what happened to these people. And they felt called into action. They made the decision right then and there they were going to be allies to this marginalized community. Now, what does it mean to be an ally? An ally is someone who raises their hand and says, "I see you. I'll pray for you. I support you in being safe." Okay, so that's the start. That's the ally. So they got together and they worked with this community, and all that the homophiles had asked for was a safe place to gather. We'll throw a party. The ministers are saying, "We'll throw a party. What if we did a Mardi Gras ball on New Year's Day of 1965 to show that it's the demonstration that it's a new day?" Really? Y'all would do that? Of course we will. And we'll invite our wives, and we'll invite other people from our community to come together. We'll all be there together in an inclusive way. And so they reached out to the community to let them know that this was going to be a safe place. But, Cecil Williams is, he knows some things. So he decided that he was going to have a conversation with the chief of police, Captain Churchill. Cowhill was his name. And so he was going to have a meeting and scheduled a meeting with Sergeant Cowhill, Captain Cowhill, to meet with him to talk about this event that the ministers, the Council of Religion and Homophiles, were going to put on January 1st, 1965. And so they marched into the office of the captain, someone that Cecil Williams had known and had many conversations with because they had worked together on what had just transpired in the civil rights movement. Well, when the captain of the police department found out why they wanted to meet with him, when they got to the appointment, suddenly they were shuffled into another room to meet with the detectives from the Vice Squad. The captain of the police wouldn't meet with them. So they had to make their presentation to these detectives that had been the very ones that have gone out and arrested people for lewd and lascivious behavior. And so they listened to Cecil Williams and the other clergies, along with 2 straight attorneys and 1 gay attorney, that was talking about the event. There would be no alcohol served. It was only a party. It was a costume party. It's in a safe environment. We just want to make it safe for these folks to be able to be together, to have a party, to celebrate on one day. Well, the detectives, of course, were not having it. They looked at these ministers and they pointed and they go, you're wearing a wedding ring. What does your wife think about this shenanigans you're trying to pull? My wife is fine with it. In fact, she'll be there. What? What are your children going to think about this horrific thing that you're engaging in? These are the scum of the earth. These are people that don't deserve to live. And so they listened. The ministers listened. They said, no, it's going to be an event. It's going to start at 9 o'clock in the evening in the California Club. It's going to be safe. We're going to be there. We've sold 1,500 tickets. Imagine that, 1,500 tickets. So they have no other business there. They get up and they leave. And as they're walking out the door, one of the ministers got shoved in the shoulders and the back, and the detective behind him said, if you're not going to do God's work, we will. Well, that was the moment that these allies became advocates. And how you make the transition from being an ally to an advocate is when you go, in the most spiritual way, hell no, not on my watch. And I'm going to take a personal risk to stand up for somebody to let them know that I have my hand at their back. That I'm going to be the one to say, not on my watch, I'm going to protect you. So the events of the day start to unfold. Plans start to be made. It's December 28th, and the event manager from the California Club calls Cecil Williams and says, I regret to inform you, but we're going to have to cancel your event. I wonder who talked to that event manager. So Cecil Williams, again, being the brilliant man that he is, said, well, have you considered what the press is going to say when I tell them that a group of clergy came together to put on a safe event at your space and you canceled it? And what are my friends at the Kiwanis and the other organizations that sometimes use your event when I tell them what happened and their cancellations start to come in? Suddenly, he was told that the event could proceed. But see, Cecil Williams did something else in that moment. Something that had never been done prior to the civil rights movement of 1964. He invited the press. Come to this event. See what happens. So all the articles of all the raids and the things that have happened in the previous years, in the 1950s and the 1960s, all people read in the newspaper was about the bar bus and the arrest for lewd and lascivious behavior. And so their imagination was all that was what was happening anytime two of those homophiles would gather. So therefore, Cecil was very smart. Let's show a different picture. He invited the press. So these three attorneys and their wives showed up, and they were in the reception hall, and they were the ticket takers. And there was this wonderful woman by the name of Nancy May who wanted to be right front and center taking those tickets, because for the first time she and her husband, who was bisexual, could go out in public and be in a place where they could be uncomfortable and didn't have to look over her shoulder. She was going to do this thing. So she wanted to be the ticket taker. Well, two things were happening simultaneously. Now, if you're at all familiar with San Francisco, the California Club on Polk Street, 625 Polk Street, is just 3 blocks up from City Hall. But when the attendees of the party got there, they noticed that both intersections had been blocked off with police cars and the red lights going. And they got in front of the building and they saw what we today would recognize as SWAT teams were lined up across the front of the building. And the intimidation worked for 900 people. 900 people turned and went home. But 600 people said, oh, hell no, not on my watch. And they made their ways through the gauntlet of police cars and the gauntlet of police officers and the SWAT teams. And they went in, bought their ticket, were greeted by those allies and advocates in the lobby, and went on in to get the punch that other wives and other people had made possible, and started to listen to the music and to have a good time. Well, needless to say, the detectives did not like that at all. So 4 of the detectives from the San Francisco Police Department made their way in and said, we're coming in to shut this thing down because there's a safety violation. And Nancy May said, do you have a ticket? Oh, no ticket? You're not getting in. They had never met such an ally as Nancy May. And so they stepped over to the side and took the pose and stood there and watched in amazement as these other folks came in. Well, suddenly one of them decided, well, then we're going to call for reinforcement. And so they called the squad that was outside, the SWAT team, in to start arresting people. They were shutting this show down. And so the SWAT team breaks through the door and comes into the building and arrests the ministers and their wives and the attorneys and their wives. And as they're carting them out of the front door of the building to take them to the paddy wagons, KPIX, KGO, KRON, lights started blazing, and they got to see they're arresting ministers? They're arresting clergy and their wives for loot. This can't be. And Cecil Williams' wife sees the camera, sees the lights, and proclaims, this is what you all tried to do to us in the South. Suddenly, those advocates became co-conspirators in the movement. They decided not only not on my watch, but I am going to risk myself, my own standing in this community, because they had been threatened. They have been threatened. They said, you do business with those folks? We'll never do business with you again. But see, this is where they were smart. Because just like what had happened in 63 and 64, television started to show people something that they had never seen before. They had kind of heard about it, but wait a minute, they just look like everyday people. Yeah, there's some women in drag, but isn't that just what Milton Berle did on that TV show last week? What's so unique about that? And so suddenly the public is aware with a new awareness that they had never seen before. Now, I say all this to say that the seed was planted in the civil rights movement. But the opportunity came on January 1st, 1965. Now, there were no pride parades, there were no marches yet. But the tipping point had already happened. And the tipping point, do not lose this fact, was clergy. Mainline clergy. But they said there's got to be a better way for us to be in community with one another. They looked for ways to be allies and advocates and co-conspirators to a movement that shifted, became the tipping point for a new way of thinking. In our lifetime, even if you weren't born yet. This is that close. You can touch it. So what's the message for us? The message for us is we have this audacious idea of followers of this faith, this philosophy, this way of living known as science of mind, that we want to be the demonstration to manifest a world that works for all. What is required to make that true? We have to be allies. We have to be advocates. And from time to time, co-conspirators. I want to bring it home. I want to make it a little bit more real for you today. I want you to imagine that you're going to be leaving here in about a half hour, and you're going to be walking out to the front of this building, going up to the corner and making a turn, and suddenly you're met by a detective who said, which one of those two churches were you attending? Which one? Would you suddenly pretend to be a congregant of the church next door? The more traditional mainline Christian church? Or would you say, I'm proudly a member of Heart and Soul Center of Light, a loving and compassionate, world-class teaching and empowerment ministry. Would you like to join me there? Would you be willing to do that? Now, over the next, dare I say, 4 years, we are going to be called to be the demonstration of what it is to bring people together. Building on that wonderful message from Reverend Angelo last week when we said we got to lead in a different way. We've got to fight a different fight. We've got to be the ally of compassion. We have to be the advocate for understanding. And we have to be the co-conspirator for change. That's what we're called to do. We have the tools to do it. We have the skills with what we have learned in this teaching to be the ones. If ever we were called, it was our calling for a time such as this. We already know how to do it. There's nobody in this room that hasn't done it before. And so I'm inviting you to first be an ally. And what does it mean to be an ally? It means to proclaim, I see you. I call upon you to be an advocate. What does it mean to be an advocate? It means to stand up for one another. I stand for your rights to be your authentic self. We are not going back. That's what an advocate proclaims. So an ally sees you. An advocate stands up for you. A co-conspirator steps out for you. They're the ones that bring the shovel at 3 a.m., if you know what I mean. That's the co-conspirator. That's what I'm calling forth in each and every one of us to be ready. This is the time that we have been called to serve. This is the time for us to engage everything that we know about affirmative prayer, everything that we know about serving our fellow man, everything that we know about being there with one another. Are you ready to accept the challenge? If so, say amen. Amen. Thank you very much. Tammy.